On another topic, Mr. President, inflation is the word on everyone's mind. We see proof of it plastered on gas stations throughout the country and in the aisles of our grocery stores. Too many families are struggling to pay bills. Just last week, the Federal Reserve launched its most forceful broadside against inflation, the largest increase in interest rates in nearly 30 years. As lawmakers, we owe the American people an honest, sober assessment of how we can start to bring down prices and help alleviate stress at the checkout lane. But sadly, the inflation conversation has been twisted with dishonesty and deflection by some political critics. Instead of passing legislation to help reduce the cost of essential goods and services like prescription drugs and child care, many are pointing the finger of blame at the Biden administration as if he invented inflation or isn't doing his best to end it. Despite the fact that it was former President Trump who urged the Federal Reserve to keep the money printer running at the start of the pandemic, and that Republicans opposed a bill that would prevent big oil companies from price gouging, we see arguments that are made totally on a political level. The bad faith arguments we've heard from across the aisle ignore an essential truth. Inflation is not just an American problem, it's a global problem. It's happening in advanced economies like the UK and France. That is largely due to disruptions in the supply chain. The phrase supply chain didn't mean much to America a few months ago, but now we know it's an important part of our challenge. This began 2 years ago with the pandemic, and it's been aggravated by Vladimir Putin's barbaric invasion of Ukraine. It's caused the cost of everything from food to energy to spike. In the words of one conservative commentator at the Wall Street Journal, and I quote, "War in Ukraine fans the flames of global inflation." So it's crucial to recognize the United States can't solve these global drivers of inflation on our own. There is one driver of inflation that is within our control: labor shortages. We have twice as many jobs that need to be filled in this country as unemployed people to fill them. What can we do? The chart tells you part of the story. This chart indicates that under the policies of the previous administration and due to COVID-19 pandemic, as well as lengthy backlogs, America's experienced a marked decline in immigration, and has had a direct and detrimental impact on working families. According to Econofact, and I quote, "Net migration to the United States has significantly declined over the past 5 years due to the policies of the Trump administration, processing backlogs, the pandemic, and other factors. This slowdown has implications for the number of workers available and for fiscal sustainability. By the end of 2021, there were 2 million fewer working-age immigrants in America than there would have been if the pre-2020 migration trends had continued." Now, perhaps your first instinct is, well, that's a good thing. That means more jobs for American workers. But the reality is not that at all. This decline in immigration is hurting working Americans and contributing to inflation. There are a number of industries in America that rely on foreign-born labor to provide affordable goods and services to our country. Industries like construction, agriculture, transportation, to name just a few. Consider the healthcare industry. Nursing homes depend on a reliable supply of immigrant workers to provide care to the elderly and disabled. But since 2019, nursing homes have lost more than 15% of their workforce. Today, nearly every nursing home in the country, 99% according to the Wall Street Journal, is experiencing staffing shortages. As a result, many of them have had to limit the number of new clients they accept. In the words of one leader in the industry, quote, "We're just looking for people to fill the roles that we need, and time and again we find it's the immigrant population that tends to respond to us." So it's our grandparents who end up paying the price for the shortage of working-age immigrants, and they're not alone. If you're in the market for a new home, you may have noticed prices are prohibitively high. And these skyrocketing costs aren't just hurting potential home buyers, they're hurting renters as well. The cost of rent is actually outpacing inflation in America. One obvious way to bring housing costs back down to earth is by expanding the supply of homes in America. There are plenty of home builders willing to help fill the void, but they've got a problem: not enough workers. Down in Dallas, Texas, one home builder named Joshua Correa has been forced to delay home construction projects for months because he can't hire field crews. In his own words, and I quote, "Immigration is very important for our workforce in the United States. We're feeling the shortage of workers, and if we're feeling it at the end of the day as builders and developers, the consumer pays the price." From building new homes to providing health care in our homes, we rely on immigrants to fill critical roles. And in the absence of immigrant workers, we as customers end up paying higher prices. If we want to solve America's worker shortage, we need to drastically increase the number of immigrants we welcome into this country. Don't just take it from me. The CEO of the Chamber of Commerce of America has called for doubling the legal immigrants into this country. In her words, and I quote, "If we can alleviate the worker shortage, it might be the fastest thing we can do to impact inflation." And that's just a short-term benefit of fixing America's broken immigration system. In the long term, comprehensive immigration reform would drive America's economic growth for years to come. According to the Economic Policy Institute, undocumented immigrants already pay nearly $12 billion in state and local taxes annually, but many of them are not on the books. By providing them a path to legal status, we could double the amount of federal tax revenue our nation collects from this group. That's money that will fund the construction of roads and bridges, make Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid payments. That's especially important when you consider the growing number of senior citizens in America who rely on these programs. By the end of this decade, more than a fifth of our population will be over the age of 65. These Americans need a reliable working-age tax base to support them. The path to legal status for undocumented immigrants also would boost our nation's GDP by more than $1 trillion over the next 10 years and create hundreds of thousands of jobs. Passing immigration reform will also help keep America on the cutting edge of innovation. Despite our former president's destructive immigration policies, America is still one of the top destinations in the world for innovators and entrepreneurs. In fact, more than half of our nation's billion-dollar startups were founded by an immigrant. Let me repeat that. More than half of our nation's billion-dollar startups were founded by immigrants. Every day that we fail to enact immigration reform, we're allowing a generation of potential innovators and skilled workers to fall through the cracks. I want to briefly share the story of one amazing person who almost fell through the cracks. His name is Dr. Alfredo Quinones, but he's more commonly known as Dr. Q. Today, Dr. Q, listen to this, is the chair of neurologic surgery at Mayo Clinic. Decades ago, when he first arrived in the United States as a teenager, he was an undocumented farm worker. He earned little more than $3 an hour picking crops in San Joaquin Valley in California. Eventually, he began working as a welder for a railroad. One day, he suffered a bad injury after falling into an empty petroleum tank. When he woke up in the hospital, Dr. Q decided to pursue his passion. He enrolled in the University of California at Berkeley and wrote his honors thesis on neuroscience. That caught the attention of the admission officers at Harvard Medical School, where he was accepted as a student. He studied hard, considering his calling, neurosurgery, and today he removes about 250 brain tumors every year. Outside of the OR, Dr. Q devotes countless hours to pioneering research. He has a very modest goal: cure cancer, and he's exploring novel methods like using human fat cells to fight brain cancer. How many other Dr. Qs are out there, hiding in the shadows of our immigration system? Isn't it time we find out, Mr. President? In the meantime, I'd like to pose a simpler question to my Republican colleagues. If you're genuinely interested in addressing inflation, will you help us move forward on this issue before the election? Your willingness to work on immigration reform will reveal the answer. It's one of the most consequential steps we can take to combat inflation. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.